Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first chapter of Sports Nutrition. This chapter will introduce you to sports nutrition while providing an overview of topics you likely learned in basic nutrition courses. This may all be familiar to you, but stay with me. This review will be helpful when we get to the subsequent chapters. First, I want to define sports nutrition so you can get an idea for what we will study this semester. Sports nutrition is a specialization within the field of nutrition. And since it requires knowledge of both nutrition and exercise sciences, it goes beyond the scope of general health and wellness. Sports nutrition can be defined as the application of general nutrition knowledge to an eating plan focused on providing energy for physical activity and or athletic competitions, and for providing nutrients for repair, recovery, and adaptation to physical training. Now, sports nutritionists design practical dietary strategies to achieve these goals. Now, a common misconception is that sports nutrition is only applicable to those who are involved in competitive sports or those performing at an elite level. Now, in our class, we'll refer to an athlete as anyone who is performing regular physical activity. That's from the competitive athlete all the way down to those who exercise at much less intense levels on a regular basis. For thousands of years, athletes have been advised about what to eat. And this is really interesting. Legend has it that a man from Italy named Milo of Croton won 6 consecutive Olympics in wrestling because of his special diet and training. Now, supposedly, Milo ate 19 pounds of meat and 19 pounds of bread per day while washing it down with 2 gallons of wine. Now, for his athletic training, he started off small and built up from there. He began his training by carrying an ox calf for a certain distance each day until it grew to an adult. This practice would certainly be frowned upon today. Now, in more modern times, sports nutrition historians consider studies of carbohydrate and fat metabolism in Sweden in the late 1930s to be the true beginning of the academic field of sports nutrition. Now, studies continued in Scandinavia through the 1960s on muscle glycogen storage and what happens to it during prolonged exercise. But it wasn't until the 1980s that the true emergence of sports nutrition as a field of study occurred. And because of all the work scientists have done over recent years, we now know the importance of proper nutrition's role in assisting an athlete's training, performance, and recovery. Now, with an ever-growing sports industry, science-based, repeatable studies are becoming abundant. However, nutritional quackery still remains a problem. Athletes must continually watch out for nutrition claims that sound too good to be true, those that have non-science-based testimonials, recommendations based only on one study, or the promise of rapid results. Now, for instance, it's no secret that the supplement industry is making big bucks. In fact, in 2016, the nutritional supplement industry contributed $122 billion to the U.S. economy. Many athletes have been convinced to believe that supplements or certain diets are necessary to compete successfully. Sports nutritionists who provide scientifically sound information to their clients will likely see athletes who benefit versus those who heed information that is anecdotal. That is, information that just feels right to the nutritionist. Now, why study sports nutrition? If you are at all involved in fitness or sports, it can truly be life-changing to understand the roles nutrients play in our health and performance. Although its history goes back thousands of years, the field of sports nutrition is a new and exciting area of study and an area that's generating lots of research interests. Funding for studies is increasing annually for research, and job opportunities are growing for those with sports nutrition backgrounds. Some of you may be interested in going into these fields. Finally, sports nutrition knowledge is valuable for anyone involved in the fitness or exercise industry. Now, before we get into the basics of sports nutrition, I wanted to provide a brief review of some general nutrition topics. First, what are the basic nutrients? Now, recall that when we speak of macronutrients, we are referring to carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. In other words, those nutrients our bodies need in large amounts on a daily basis. And recall that the micronutrients, or those nutrients we need in smaller amounts each day, include vitamins and minerals. And water's in its own class since intake varies so much from individual to individual. Okay, now let's review carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are compounds made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And once in the body, they provide the main source of fuel once it is converted into glucose. Now, carbohydrates are energy yielding nutrients, and they provide the body with 4 kilocalories per gram of food. And recall that carbohydrates are found in many foods, especially grains, fruits, and vegetables. Now, proteins are compounds composed of amino acids, some of which can be made by the body, called the non essential amino acids, or those that must be obtained through the diet. These are called essential amino acids. Proteins are extremely important for the development, growth, and repair of muscles. They can be used for energy, but are not the preferred energy source for the body. And as a review, proteins are found in many foods, such as milk and milk alternative items, animal sources, and nuts and beans. And in the United States, most of us do not lack in our intake of proteins at all. In fact, we may overconsume proteins. Now, fats, also known as lipids, provide 9 kilocalories per gram of food and serve as a concentrated form of energy. Fats have several important roles in the body, including providing structure to cell membranes, insulating nerve cells, and assisting with the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins such as vitamins A and D. Butter, oils, meats, nuts, and avocados are good examples of foods that contain fat. The human body will generally use fats as a fuel while at rest and during periods of low to moderate exercise. Now remember that vitamins are micronutrients composed mostly of carbon and other elements. The human body cannot produce vitamins in high enough quantities, therefore they must be obtained through food consumption. Now, a substance is also classified as a vitamin if it is essential to at least one vital process in the body. For instance, vitamin C is necessary for the production of collagen, which provides structure to bone, ligaments, and blood vessels. And vitamins are found in almost all foods, especially fruits and vegetables, and can be classified as either water or fat soluble. Now, just like vitamins, minerals are considered micronutrients, and they're composed of elements but lack carbon. Minerals, which are found in a wide variety of foods, are used by the body to perform many functions, such as bone building to transmitting nerve impulses. Now, recall that minerals can be classified as either major minerals or those required in amounts greater than 100 milligrams per day, or they can be classified as minor minerals, those required in amounts less than 100 milligrams per day. Now, although water does not provide energy to the body, it's essential for life. It assists with body processes such as temperature regulation, joint lubrication, and transport of nutrients to tissues throughout the body. Water makes up 55 to 60% of our bodies, and aside from plain water, fruits, vegetables, soup, coffee, sports drinks, and fruit juices are just a few of the foods and beverages we consume that provide water to our bodies. So remember, the macronutrients, carbs, fats, and proteins, are energy-providing nutrients. And while vital for our body processes, vitamins, minerals, and water do not provide energy. Once we consume food and the nutrients within, our bodies use specific metabolic pathways to break down the macronutrients into their constituents. The breakdown releases energy, and this energy can be used to make an even higher energy molecule called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. Cells, including that of muscle cells, depend upon this ATP as their direct source of energy. Now, please review the terminology for the dietary reference intakes that you see on this slide. Table 1.1 on page 7 of our textbook provides a description of these terms. Plus, I've included a video review within our Blackboard chapter information for those who feel they need to brush up on some of these general nutrition terms. Now, to continue our review, what are enriched and fortified foods, and why should athletes be concerned with these types of foods? Now, enrichment is the addition of specific amounts of vitamins and minerals to refined foods, also known as processed um, or to refined foods, also known as processed grain foods like wheat flour and white rice. And as you see in the picture on the left, rice upon harvest is polished and becomes smooth and white. This process destroys much of the B vitamins that were initially in the grain. Now, manufacturers enrich white rice in an attempt to replenish the vitamins that are lost during the polishing process. The grains that are left are called unpolished, I'm sorry, on the right are the unpolished brown rice, and these keep the bulk of their nutritional value. This is why you may hear that brown rice is better for you than white rice. And a food that has been fortified has had the nutrients added to it that, in general, were not naturally found in the food to begin with. Many of these foods, such as almond or soy milk and breakfast cereals, are enriched with vitamins and minerals like calcium and iron. Now, since vitamins and minerals have upper dietary limits, athletes should ensure that they're not exceeding these limits. Since athletes often use highly fortified sports drinks, bars, and shakes, they really need to watch this. Now, recall that exceeding intake limits can be dangerous over time. Okay, moving on. In 2011, the USDA released the MyPlate visual and it replaced the food pyramid. This food guidance system is a useful way for individuals to visualize a healthy, balanced plate. You've probably learned this before, but take a look at this graphic. It's split into 4 sections: fruits, vegetables, grains, and then you have your proteins. Now, the circle next to the plate is a cup of dairy. Now, it's easy to remember if you look at it a time or two, but a downfall of the plate is that, especially for athletes, the plate is not a one size fits all. Someone in intense training leading up to a marathon will have a plate that may look different from someone whose training or exercise does not require more than an average number of daily calories. I've included a visual on this week's chapter material on the Blackboard site. It's a visual created by the U.S. Olympic Committee called the Athlete's Plate. And it shows 3 plates that meet the requirements of MyPlate: one for light, one for moderate, and one for hard training or activity levels. Check that out. It's really, really interesting to see. Now, what factors should be considered when developing an athlete's nutrition plan? Every athlete is different, which is what makes sports nutrition such an interesting field of study. Now, when prescribing a nutrition plan, the basics will be the same for each athlete, but the sports nutritionist must take into account the type of training the athlete performs and personal taste preferences. What one athlete likes, another may not. Factors that should be taken into consideration are the athlete's health history. An athlete with diabetes, for instance, would definitely require a different recommendation than a non-diabetic athlete. The sports nutritionist must also review the energy demands for the sport in which the athlete participates to ensure the athlete is receiving adequate calories from appropriate food sources. Other factors are how much the athlete trains and what his or her living arrangements are. Do they have access to the university cafeteria, or are they preparing most foods themselves? Finally, the sports nutritionist must also understand the athlete's current access to food and his or her sports team schedule to be sure the athlete can make proper nutrition choices on the road. Now, to review, Chapter 1 provided a basic nutrition review with a focus on sports nutrition. Sports nutrition was introduced while a review of the macro and micronutrients were discussed. We briefly touched on these nutrients and which ones provide energy to make ATP and which do not. Enrichment and fortification were covered, and a refresher was given on MyPlate. Finally, we covered what a sports nutritionist should take into account when developing a nutrition plan for an athlete. If you have any questions at all about the topics reviewed in Chapter 1, please do not hesitate to contact me.